Okay, I'm recording.
Okay, so let's get started, everyone, tonight. I'm really excited to present on COVID-19 vaccines, and I want to go over the science and answer your questions. I think actually going over the science in detail and going over the trials in more detail than others do is really important for people to understand the COVID-19 vaccine. So I'm excited to do that. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. And where I live and work, which is Toronto, is the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee. And Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I identify as a settler and acknowledge the importance of treaties and the importance of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And if you haven't done so, I highly recommend reading the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So what I'm planning to go over tonight is a brief review of the history of and what are vaccines in general. Then I want to review the COVID-19 vaccines and the clinical trials of the approved vaccines in Canada. And then I think probably why everyone's here is you want to hear about the pressing issues and the pressing questions, for example, side effects like clots, the allergic reactions, and the variants of concern. And we'll have a question answer period at the end. Okay, what is a vaccine? A vaccine is a substance that's designed to create immunity against a disease, usually an infection. Although some vaccines are being developed, for example, against cancer, but typically it's been and currently available vaccines are for infections. And what it does is it stimulates a specific white blood cell, the B cell, to produce antibodies. And those antibodies target the infection and fight off the infection. It's usually given by an injection, although there are some vaccines that can be administered by nasal spray or by mouth. So when the vaccine is given, specific antibodies are produced to the infection that vaccine is made for. And so then if someone gets exposed to the infection, their body can fight it off. And if you can imagine, the first vaccine was actually developed over 200 years ago. Dr. Edward Jenner discovered and used a vaccine for smallpox in 1796. Smallpox was ravaging the world in the 18th and 19th century. And he observed that people who milked cows and who were exposed to cowpox weren't contracting human smallpox. So he had the theory that if he used the fluid from the smallpox pustules, which he did, he took that and he injected it into an 8-year-old boy and then exposed him to smallpox, and the boy didn't get smallpox. And this led to worldwide mass smallpox vaccination. And if you actually look at newspaper articles from that era, there was vaccine hesitancy even back then. But quickly across the whole world, as vaccines were rolling out and reducing smallpox vaccines, the whole world caught on, and these mass smallpox vaccinations were rolled out, and smallpox was eradicated in 1980. And so maybe we're hoping we can do that with COVID-19 also. Vaccines are the single most important medical discovery to save human lives. In fact, it might not just be human lives. We give animals, farm animals, a lot of vaccines, so maybe even animal lives also. Vaccines have prevented at least 10 million deaths between 2010 and 2015, and many millions more have been protected and live and protected from the illness. And probably hundreds of millions of people, lives have been saved since the beginning of vaccine history. We now have 27 human vaccines. You'll see even we have an Ebola vaccine available that's highly effective. So these infections come out, and scientists create effective vaccines, and they save lives. Also, this is not the first time that we have a vaccine that's using a new technology, or that we have a new vaccine type. In fact, the hepatitis B vaccine was the first genetically engineered vaccine back in 1986. It's a protein vaccine. What scientists discovered is they could take the gene of the hepatitis B surface antigen and insert it into yeast. And then the yeast produce the hepatitis B surface antigen protein. And then that's what gets injected, the hepatitis B surface antigen protein over 3 to 4 times over 6 months. And it's highly effective. And it saved millions of lives. And as you know, the hepatitis B vaccine now is readily accessible. We give it to babies at birth. We give it to children in grade 7. Healthcare workers and educators require it for work. So new technologies have been developed and get adopted as the standard. And that is likely going to happen with the COVID-19 vaccine. What about the COVID-19 vaccines themselves? Okay, well, remember on the first slide, we talked about how vaccines work. Well, let's go into it in a bit more detail. It's just like human biology. And our bodies are doing this all the time, in fact, because what happens is if you actually get an infection, your body would, if you got the infection, it would trigger B cells, actually a very specific type of B cell. The B cell actually evolves into a plasma cell, and then it's the plasma cell that creates the antibodies. So our bodies are already doing this. So in the case of a vaccine, we're taking the opportunity that our body already does this by taking a whole or part of the organism, either as a live attenuated virus, so that's like in measles, mumps, rubella, in an activated virus, a protein like in hepatitis B, or like an adenovirus, which we have COVID-19 adenovirus vaccines, like animal rabies is an adenovirus vaccine, and actually also the Ebola vaccine is an adenovirus vaccine. So something from the organism gets introduced, and that triggers B cells to become plasma cells, and those plasma cells create antibodies that will fight off the infection if we're ever exposed. But for COVID-19 to be able to create a vaccine, we needed to find which part of the virus we were going to target. Which part of the virus would the immune system target and fight it off? Luckily, we were really lucky. They found a target very quickly. And that target for the COVID-19 vaccine is the spike protein. And the spike protein is that little red knob on the outside of the vaccine that gives it that corona crown shape. And that spike protein is what binds to the human cell and enters into the cell. So it's a very important part. It's a critical protein to the virus. It's relatively well conserved, meaning that it doesn't change. So it's a good choice for a vaccine. And also antibodies against the spike protein from survivors protected animals in passive transfer experiments. So we knew that it was an important protein. Probably the most significant event was a brave Chinese researcher released the full sequence of the COVID-19 virus in January 2020. And so here it is. And with that, other scientists could take the RNA sequence of the spike protein and develop vaccines. And so that's what scientists did. They took that COVID-19 virus sequence. And we have actually all different kinds of vaccine candidates that are being investigated. Some scientists are looking at live attenuated vaccines, inactive vaccines, protein vaccine, viral vector vaccines, DNA vaccines, RNA vaccines. And the ones in purple are the ones that have finished their trials. Of course, the messenger RNA vaccines and the viral vector vaccines are the ones that Health Canada has approved. So I'll go into more details about those. However, there is a protein vaccine that finished its trial, but the Novavax vaccine, which is highly effective and has submitted to Health Canada. So we'll hear about that one soon also. So the COVID-19 vaccines that have been approved in Canada, as you all know, there's 2 messenger RNA vaccines, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, and there's 2 inactivated viral vector vaccines, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. How do messenger RNA vaccines work? This is the one that's a little bit of a newer technology, but the concept is so simple. It's amazing to me. And I work in the area of HIV. So to think that they could possibly use this technology to create an HIV vaccine is going to be amazing to me. And I'm sure to many of my colleagues on tonight with me and with us. So the idea is that the messenger RNA encodes for the S protein. And if you see at the bottom here, this is what our body does all the time. Our human cells has DNA, but we have to create proteins. We have to create proteins for our skin, in our blood. That's what our body does. We create proteins all the time. So the way that's done is the DNA is converted, it's what's called transcribed into messenger RNA. So DNA is single-stranded, messenger RNA is, DNA is double-stranded, and messenger RNA is single-stranded. And then from the messenger RNA, it gets what's called translated into the proteins, into protein. And that happens all the time in our bodies. So what scientists did is they took the gene of the spike protein and they made it into a messenger RNA code. And actually messenger RNA as a single strand is very fragile. So that's actually why it's been hard to produce messenger RNA vaccines, but they were able to stabilize it in a lipid nanoparticle substance. And that's how it gets injected. And that's why the messenger RNA vaccines have to be kept at very cold temperature. But also means that once it enters into your body, it does its work and it's actually gone very quickly from your body. And so the messenger RNA gets injected and then it goes into the cell and it translates and it produces spike proteins in the body. And then your own cells, the plasma cells, create antibodies to the spike protein. And the messenger RNA disappears, the spike protein disappears, and all you're left with are antibodies. And then if you never come into contact with COVID-19, actually, it's not like the antibodies are necessarily circulating. What happens is the B cells hold the memory of how to produce those antibodies, so that if a person ever does get exposed to COVID-19, those cells are ready to convert to plasma cells and create the antibodies, just like our body does all the time. How about viral vector vaccines? So it's the same concept. They took the COVID-19 spike protein gene. In this case, they took the DNA. And because DNA is double-stranded, it's much more stable. So it can be kept at higher temperatures, so like a fridge or room temperature, and we'll go over that. And they inserted the spike protein gene into an inactivated, non-replicating chimpanzee adenovirus, okay? So here's the adenovirus. The adenovirus just ends up being a vehicle to be able to hold the spike protein gene and being able to inject it. That's all the adenovirus is. It's inactivated, so it doesn't multiply. The adenovirus, it's inactivated, so it doesn't actually cause infection, and it's non-replicating, meaning adenovirus doesn't make copies of itself. What happens is the body does the same thing, converts the DNA to RNA, then the RNA becomes encodes for the spike protein for the body to do its job to create plasma cells and B cells and antibodies. Let's look at the trials themselves. This is my favorite part because they're just incredible. So I'm really excited to share the trial results with you. The first trial I'm going to show you is for the Pfizer vaccine. And the data was released on November 9th, and the study was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, December 31st. So they ran a multinational placebo-controlled. So that means that half of the participants got the vaccine, but then the other half just randomly got what we call a placebo. So they got, for example, a saline injection instead of the vaccine. And it's randomized, so it's done at the flip of a coin, and it's also blinded, so which means we don't know which one people got until the study is finished. And so the vaccine and the placebo also were given at day 1, and then day 21 to persons 16 years of age and older in the US, Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Germany, and Turkey. And as I said, because the messenger RNA is fragile, it has to be kept at minus 70 degrees. And we look at something called the endpoint. What's going to show us that the vaccine is better than placebo? And in this case, and pretty much in all of the vaccine studies, the endpoint is confirmed cases of COVID. So by NP swab, it was 7 days after the second dose. So in all the other trials, it's 14 days after the second dose. But it's important to understand they only test people who are symptomatic. And that is the endpoint. And that's actually what we care about. What we care about is that people don't get severe COVID and don't end up in hospital and don't die. So that's why these studies are designed like that. And this is just incredible. They randomized 43,548 participants, and 43,448 received an injection, half the vaccine and half the placebo. And then when you look at the actual raw numbers, you really see, how amazing these vaccines are. Out of 170 confirmed cases of COVID-19, 162 of them were in the placebo and 8 in the vaccine group, with a 95% efficacy rate. Of the 10 severe cases, 9 were in the placebo group and 1 in the vaccine group. And I'm going to go over this in the next slides. Okay, so this is another way to show the efficacy, and I want you to hone in on this blown up part. Which shows the red line is the vaccine group and the blue line is the placebo group. And these are the number of COVID cases. So at 0 days, there were no cases. And after getting the vaccine, there were the same rates of COVID cases until you hit day 12. So that means that after getting the Pfizer vaccine, and I'm going to show you, it's the same for the Moderna vaccine and pretty close for the AstraZeneca and J&J vaccine, it's after 12 days or 2 weeks that the vaccine kicks in and is actually pretty effective after 2 weeks. And you see the lines start to diverge. In fact, in this study, there was 70% efficacy after the first dose in the trial, 14 days after the first dose. The Pfizer vaccine is also effective across a diversity of people. So you see here at the top, the 95% efficacy, and it's pretty much the same for all the age groups, by sex. They don't show gender, unfortunately, by race, and by country. Okay, what about side effects? I think it's important for people who are going to get the COVID-19 vaccines to know that side effects are common. This is the COVID-19 itself is a very immunologic infection. So if you give the vaccine, it's going to cause an immune response, which will most commonly cause a sore arm. 66 to 83% of the time, redness less commonly, and possibly some swelling. These side effects are less common in people over 71, over 55, and they're also less common after the second dose. And also systemic side effects are common. So that means like full body side effects. Again, because the virus itself is a very immune triggering virus, it causes immune-like side effects. But those side effects usually only last 24 hours. Fatigue, headache, muscle aches, joint aches, and a few people get the shivering. I actually got it after my second dose, which are called chills. So expect that. And then after 24 hours, you're usually side effect free. Of course, there's a range. I've heard of people having side effect for 3 days or even 5 days in some people. But then after that, they went away. Okay, what about the Moderna vaccine? It's also a messenger RNA vaccine, and they released their trial. This is their trial on November 16th, 2020, published in the same journal, in the New England Journal of Medicine. And their vaccine is given at day 1 and then day 28. And it only needs to be kept at minus 20 degrees. Which is helpful for distribution. And their primary endpoint was, again, confirmed COVID testing only in symptomatic cases 14 days after the second dose. And they enrolled over 30,000 participants. And look at these numbers. Out of 196 confirmed cases, 185 were in the placebo group and 11 in the vaccine group, showing a 94.1% efficacy. Out of 30 severe cases, 30 were in the placebo group and 0 in the vaccine group. I'm not going to show you all of the slides. I have them, but I took them out for timing. But the side effect profile and it working in diversity of people is almost exactly the same. I really want to. I've heard of people going in line to get the vaccines, and when they find out they're getting the Moderna vaccine, they actually leave because they say they want to get the Pfizer vaccine. To me, there's really no difference between the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. They're both messenger RNA vaccines and highly effective. Okay, what is different is the AstraZeneca vaccine, because remember, it is a non-replicating viral vector vaccine, and the studies are ongoing. There were 3 studies for their labeling trial, which they published in the Lancet on December 8th. And the 3 trials, one was done in the UK, one in Brazil, and one in South Africa. In one of the trials, they gave meningococcal vaccine for the control group, and in 2 of the other trials, they gave saline. And the vaccine is given at day 1 and day 28. And again, because it's more stable, it can be kept at fridge temperature. And like the Moderna vaccine trial, its endpoint was confirmed COVID cases 14 days after the second dose. They randomized 24,000 people, and for their interim analysis, they reported on 11,636. Now, a strange thing, funny thing happens in this AstraZeneca vaccine. some people on the call work with me, and we do clinical trials for a living. And this is surprising that this happened, but there was a computer error in the UK, and about 2,800 participants got a half dose, a low dose for their first dose of AstraZeneca, and then the standard dose for the second one. And then they figured out this happened, and they reverted to the standard doses for the 2 shots. But with regulators, they decided to continue to monitor and to capture the endpoints of those who got the lower dose for the first shot. And what they found was that in those who got the 2 standard doses, the efficacy was 62.1%. But in those who got the low dose for the first dose and the standard dose for the second, the efficacy was 90%. And I'm going to go through this a bit of an explanation about why this is theoretically and scientifically important. But also important to note, out of 10 severe cases, they were all in the placebo group. In terms of serious adverse events, there was 1 case of hemolytic anemia and 2 cases of transverse myelitis in the vaccine arm, deemed to be unrelated. And then down here are the side effects of the AstraZeneca vaccine that are in the Health Canada product monograph. And it seems like the AstraZeneca vaccine might have a little bit more side effects in terms of site tenderness, injection pain, vaccine, more headache, and muscle aching, malaise. But again, it's for 24 hours, maybe 48 hours, then goes away. Now, we're actually, the UK has vaccinated about over 20 million people in their country with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So data is coming out every day from them to understand this vaccine. And this is some of the important data, is that in this study, and actually in all the studies, studies don't run perfectly. So not everyone comes back at 21 or 28 days to get their second dose. So in all of the studies, including Pfizer and Moderna, we have participants who got their second vaccine dose late. And so in the AstraZeneca trial, people who, they found that after the first single standard dose, the efficacy was 76.0% from day 22 to day 90. And antibodies stayed steady. So that's actually really important because we want, and that'll become relevant in Canada because we're delaying the second dose. Also, and I think this kind of explains why giving the lower dose for the first injection caused higher efficacy, is because sometimes when you give a vaccine, if you give it too close, or if you give too much, the second dose can actually dampen the immune response of the first one. And so what they actually found was that people with the AstraZeneca vaccine, where they had 2 standard doses, if you delayed the second dose to 12 weeks or longer, the efficacy was 81.3%. And actually, so if anyone got the AstraZeneca vaccine, you actually do want your second dose to be 12 weeks or later. You don't want it at the 28-day mark because if you get it too close, the theory is it dampens the immune response compared to people who got the AstraZeneca vaccine 6 weeks apart or less, only had a response of 55.1%. Health Canada has approved 2 versions of this vaccine, the AstraZeneca and Covishield. Covishield is made in India, but they're the exact same vaccine. And they were approved on February 26, 2021 for all adults over the age of 18. And NACI is currently recommending it for people 30 years and older. And I'm going to show you the data to support that. Okay, not available yet in Canada, but hopefully will be soon, is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so it again is an adenovirus vaccine. It's given as a single dose. Johnson & Johnson has added on to their trial to study people who get a second dose. So we'll have to wait for those study results. And they carried out studies in the US, South Africa, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, and Mexico. And they enrolled 44,325 participants. And they included about 39,000 in this interim analysis. And so overall, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is 66% effective at preventing moderate to severe COVID. So that's 2 weeks after the injection. 85% effective at preventing the most serious outcomes, and 100% effective at preventing COVID-related hospitalizations and deaths. And the specifics of those numbers at both 14 days after injection and 28 days after injection are in these boxes here. And part of the one reason that is leading to the J&J vaccine having slightly lower efficacy is that the B1351 variant in South Africa has a slightly reduced efficacy to this vaccine, but really not hugely decreased. So we're talking 64% versus 66%, 81.7% versus 85%, but that slightly lowers the numbers overall. While, so for example, if you looked at participants just in the US for this vaccine, the efficacy was 72% for moderate COVID and 85.9% for severe and critical COVID and hospitalizations. Really incredible findings. I think I saw this in the newspaper last Friday. Health Canada is holding off on the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine distribution. We have millions of doses that have arrived. I just want to make it clear that they're holding back these vaccines, not because of the side effects, like the clots. They're actually holding back to make sure that they didn't come from the plant that had quality control issues. To me, this is the most important aspect of all the vaccines. This is of all the people vaccinated in the trials as of January 31st, 2021, there were 0 people hospitalized, 0 people had died from COVID. And at the time, and I think nobody in the trials had died from the vaccine. I saw some updated numbers today that 1 or 2 people in these trials have been hospitalized. And that's going to happen. People are going to get vaccinated. And we have to remember these vaccines aren't 100% effective. So people are going to get hospitalized. But the key still is no one has died from COVID after getting the vaccine. Okay, pressing issues. I think the reason why everyone's here. Let's talk about them. The pressing issue with the messenger RNA vaccine is what we discovered in December and January, is that it's associated, it's still rare, but a real risk of what's called anaphylaxis reaction. And anaphylaxis is a severe allergy. So, people or parents who have children who have peanut allergies, or so forth already know about anaphylaxis, right? Because anaphylaxis is the most severe form of allergy, which is associated with generalized itching, a diffuse rash. But the scary part is that it can lead to swelling of the throat, and then that can cause obstruction of the trachea, and then a person can't breathe. And so it was discovered that we saw the first case of an anaphylactic reaction to the Pfizer vaccine. And now we understand this side effect really well. There are 4.7 cases per million of cases of anaphylaxis per dose administered of the Pfizer vaccine. And it's important to understand that all vaccines can be associated with anaphylaxis. It's not just these messenger RNA vaccines. So Moderna potentially has slightly less cases of anaphylaxis, 2.5 cases per million, but that's compared to the influenza vaccine, which has a rate of 1 case of anaphylaxis per million. No vaccine recipients have died because we really understand that 89% of anaphylaxis cases happen within 30 minutes and 100% within 2 hours. And that's why people have to wait 15 minutes at the vaccine site. And then also be cognizant and careful for the 15 minutes even after that. And then once you're past the 2-hour mark, it's free sailing. You're out of the anaphylaxis window. But it's important to know, if anyone does get this, you have to go to the pharmacy, call 911. I would call 911 right away because the treatment is epinephrine. And it's amazing because we understand this now. And so who shouldn't take the messenger RNA vaccine? It's a very small group. So this is what NACI says, is that anybody with a prior severe allergy or anaphylaxis to the Pfizer or Moderna messenger RNA vaccine, so you shouldn't get the second dose of that vaccine, or if you have a prior severe allergy or anaphylaxis to polyethylene glycol, because that is in the lipid material. And if you had an allergy or anaphylaxis to polyethylene glycol, you would know it because polyethylene glycol is in so many products. So you would know it, and you would probably already have a medical alert bracelet to it. So it's very few people who can't take this vaccine. So the question I get asked a lot, well, what if I have allergies to antibiotics, other medicines, food? It's fine to take these messenger RNA vaccines if you have any of those allergies. Even if you are the kind of person that you say, I'm just a very allergic person in general, it's fine to get the vaccine. Okay, so let's move on to the side effect of clots. So the technical term for the serious side effect from the AstraZeneca vaccine, and now I'm going to show you also the J&J vaccine, is vaccine-induced thrombosis and thrombocytopenia. So it doesn't only cause clots, but it causes a low platelet count, which that's the part of the blood that causes clotting. So you get clotting plus you can get bleeding. 25 cases were reported in Europe, and this was out of 20 million people at the time. And what we understand now is we understand this phenomenon very well. They've even figured out the mechanism of action of it. And so it happens up to 20 days after the vaccine. People will present with a very severe and worsening headache and blurred vision, breathlessness because of clots that could go to the lung. The headache is from a clot behind the eye. Swelling of or a cold leg is a clot in the leg. There's been a couple of cases of a clot in an abdominal vein. But again, by now, actually in Europe and in the UK, close to 100 million doses of AstraZeneca have been given, and we really understand the rate and the rate of blood clots or a VITT with the AstraZeneca vaccine is 4 in a million. And so when you compare that to clots related to other medications or things that we do all the time, it's a fraction. So compared to the birth control pill, which has a clot rate of 900 in a million, the average Canadian has a clot rate of 1,290 in a million. And the clotting might actually be occurring because COVID itself is associated with clotting. So if someone actually got COVID, then the risk of clotting is 147,000 in a million. Something that many of us do all the time is we get on a plane, and flying poses the risk of 1,000 in a million of getting a blood clot. And so therefore, experts support individuals over the age of 30 years of age getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. And this is even if you have a known blood clotting disorder. And that's because the mechanism of action is an antibody that is very specific to platelet factor 4. So it's immune mediated. It's not due to the usual clotting reasons. And so right now, the hospital that I work at just says everyone can get the AstraZeneca vaccine, except people who have autoimmune disorders to heparin, because it's a similar mechanism. So anti-heparin antibodies, or who have autoimmune diseases to platelets. These are very, very rare, and you would know if you have them. And so now I'm going to show you the data that was put out by Cambridge University and also adopted by the European Medical Agency to indicate why people 30 years and over can be getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. And what this analysis or pictograph or infographic shows is what is the risk of being admitted to the ICU due to COVID every 16 weeks for every 100,000 people if you don't get vaccinated, versus what's the risk of getting a blood clot due to the AstraZeneca vaccine under 100,000 people if you have a low exposure risk, like if the prevalence of COVID is low in where you live, so 2 per 10,000, low. So you can see, like, let's jump to 40 to 49 as in Ontario now. AstraZeneca is approved for 40 and older. So you can see that if you don't get the vaccine, the chance of you getting COVID and ending up in the ICU is 5.7 per 100,000 versus getting a clot is 0.5 per 100,000. And for 30-year-olds, it's 2.7 per 100,000 versus 0.8. So I hope that Ontario soon will open up the AstraZeneca vaccine to people 30 years and older. But you can see if we have a low prevalence, that the risks balance out between the groups. However, when you go to a medium prevalence of COVID, let's jump right again to 30 and older, the protection is even more dramatic. So you have 8 out of 100,000 chance of ending up in the ICU versus 0.8 out of 100,000 getting a clot. And even the difference in 20 to 29-year-olds starts to separate. And then if you have a high prevalence of COVID, then it potentially becomes beneficial even to vaccinate people 20 years and older. Do you see that? Okay, what about clots, or as we know it, vaccine-induced thrombosis and thrombocytopenia from the J&J vaccine? This is the experimental name of the J&J vaccine, AD26-CoV-2S. And this was actually just published on April 30th. And so they reported in the US 6 cases of cerebrovenous sinus thrombosis out of 7 million doses being given. And then an additional 6 cases were reported out to April 21st, and that's what they reported on in the paper. Interestingly, it was all women between the ages of 18 and less than 60. Symptoms all developed between 6 days and 15 days. 11 presented with a headache, 1 with back pain and then a headache. And you can see how this has evolved. Back in Europe, when this phenomenon was starting, sadly to say, but all the cases died. But now that we understand and we understand how to treat this, only three of the 12 in the US died. And I'm sure the rest will all live, because the treatment is to give anticoagulation, but we don't give heparin, we give a different anticoagulation. So now we know how to recognize it and we know how to treat it. Since April 21st, 2 more cases were reported in the vaccine reporting system. And I just thought it was important to list this because 1 was in a man younger than the age of 40, and 1 was in a woman who was between 40 and 59. Okay, so should I take the vaccine in terms of some priority groups or groups that there've been questions about? So 2 weeks ago, the Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology of Canada has indicated that pregnant women, because they have a state, or pregnant people, because they have a state of immunosuppression, they have actually been moved into the high priority group. And they're saying that pregnant people should get vaccinated. Also, people who are breastfeeding can get vaccinated, and there's no consequence to breastfeeding. And in fact, you might pass antibodies through the breast milk that could be protective to the baby. What about immunosuppressed people or people who are on immunosuppressant medications? Finally, this group has been added and is added as either a high priority group or an at-risk priority group. And to me and many experts, it's even more important for these groups of people to get vaccinated because they're at higher risk of getting severe disease and ending up hospitalized. And again, if you have any food allergies, antibiotic allergies, or other allergies, even if they're severe, you can get the vaccine, any 4 of these vaccines. New variants of concern. So I have a whole talk on new variants of concerns if people ever want to hear that one. But viruses mutate all the time. So that's what's happening. And then the virus variants that are more easily transmitted take over. That's what happens. So the one that's taking over in Canada is B117. And that's the one from the UK. And it's going to take over probably more than these 3 other variants because I believe it's probably more transmissible. It's more transmissible. It infects children more. It leads to higher hospitalizations and higher ICU admissions, higher mortality. And most vaccines work against them. Okay, what's happening in Ontario? I have here the graph from April 30th, and in the blue is the B117 variant. And so basically in Ontario, it's that variant which is taking over to be the vast majority of cases. And I actually put the raw numbers down here. You can see that it's in the thousands that are the UK variant, and very few are the South African and Brazilian variant. And in terms of the vaccine studies, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and J&J are effective against the UK variant. So that's good news. That's the variant we have in Ontario now. Pfizer, Moderna, J&J are effective against the South African variant, but the AstraZeneca vaccine is not effective against the South African variant. And what's really important, the concept that's so important about these variants of concern, because they're so easily transmitted now, it's really a race between vaccinating people and these new variants transmitting. So we cannot stop the pandemic without herd immunity. So people are either going to have to get vaccinated or they're going to get COVID and get immunity that way. And look at, and like for the good news, look at what the UK did. They rapidly rolled out vaccinations while their B117 epidemic was happening in December and January. And they were able to really decrease the rates of their new cases. They opened up on April 12th. And their cases have bumped up a little bit, but are now staying steady. So I'm hoping that this is what we're going to see in Ontario and Canada. Okay, another pressing issue and question I get quite a bit is, what about the fact of the delay of the second dose? I personally think that I think it's likely fine from a immunologic standpoint. A lot of studies have shown that 2 weeks after the first dose of all of the vaccines, there's 65 to 85% efficacy. Some of the latest studies from the US is 85% efficacy after the 2 weeks after the first dose. And then it's after 2 weeks after the second dose, we're increasing that to 90% efficacy. I listened to my colleague today, Alison McGeer, talk about this, and she described it as the first dose is like you're getting your meal, and then that gives you the majority of your protection, and then the second dose is like your dessert. And so what NACI decided, and this was based on modeling that was done, which was, if we give everyone in Canada a first dose, or as many people in Canada as we can a first dose, it's going to save lives. That's what the modeling showed. So it's like, let's not give some people their dessert, their cupcake for dessert, so that more people can get their first meal and save lives. And studies have shown that after the first dose, antibodies persist out to 3 months. I think it's likely, I think it's likely fine to be delaying the second dose. And I think we probably all heard in the news yesterday and today that as vaccines roll in, they might be narrowing the timing of the second dose. We'll have to see. And vaccine administration is increasing in Canada, so that's nice to see. We're up to, it might be even higher today, but the last time I checked, we were up to 33% of Canadians or people living in Canada who've had their first dose. Okay, so we're almost at the end, and I'm going to open it up to questions, but some common questions that I get. When can I get the vaccine if I've had COVID-19? So what experts are saying, and what's actually in the consent form when you get vaccinated, is to wait 90 days after you've had COVID-19. So wait 90 days after your positive test result. Why? The reason is because your own body has produced antibodies to COVID-19 after having had the infection, so that if you got the vaccine too close to having had COVID, it's like you have the antibodies and the immune response, then you get the vaccine, you might have a heightened immune response and have more side effects. So that's the reasoning for it. The timing in terms of picking 90 days is theoretical, but I would go by that. That's what I've been telling my patients. When can I get another vaccine? So this is something that's important. So in the consent form, it says that you shouldn't have had another vaccine before, and you shouldn't have another vaccine 14 days before or after having had the COVID-19 vaccine. Wow, I just realized that's going to pose some difficulty during flu vaccine season. We'll have to see how we handle that. Okay, some more common questions. Can I get COVID-19 if I got the vaccine? So the answer is yes, but as you can see from the studies I just presented, it's going to be much, much less common. Also, in the studies, remember, they only tested people that were symptomatic. So if you get the vaccine, it is possible that you get COVID-19, but you're asymptomatic. And if you are symptomatic, you're going to have milder disease. The key is that if you get the COVID-19, sorry, this should say vaccine, you won't be hospitalized or die. Can I transmit COVID-19 if I have gotten the vaccine? So studies have shown that if you have the vaccine and you do get COVID-19, the viral load is lower. And so yes, you could possibly transmit the virus if you get infected with COVID-19, if you got the vaccine, but because of that lower viral load, the chance of transmission is also decreased. And we're actually getting the more thorough studies actually confirming that. So in summary, we have very effective COVID-19 vaccines. 4 of them have been approved in Canada. There's little risk. So we're talking about risks in the order of 4 in a million. So of anaphylaxis from the messenger RNA vaccines or the clots, VITT from AstraZeneca and J&J vaccines, but we understand their mechanisms now and we know how to treat them. I showed you the UK data showing the reduced cases after vaccination. I didn't show you, but Israel has shown the same finding in terms of incredible results of keeping people out of hospital after widespread vaccinations. It's critical to get vaccinated because our lives will not return to some form of normality until we get herd immunity. And that will only happen if people either get COVID or get vaccinated. The new variants are a problem. They transmit easier and give even more reason why it's so important to get vaccinated. Please continue to wear masks. Please continue to social distance. Please try not gathering and not going to work if you're sick. It's important to practice these, especially right after you get the vaccine. I showed you that the protection doesn't start until 14 days after the vaccine. We've heard cases of people get vaccinated and then they go and get together with friends 2 days after they get vaccinated. You really have to wait until those antibodies have formed and when we get more direction from our public health. Here are the references, and I'm going to open it up to questions.
Hey, Mona, there's some questions in the chat. Do you want me to give you those questions?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one is the vaccination effective once forever, or are we going to have to get additional vaccines?
Okay. Yeah, I should add that to the commonly asked questions because I get asked that one a lot also. So right now, we don't know the answer to that. So all we have are studies showing antibody results 6 months after having received the vaccine. And 6 months after having the vaccine, antibodies are staying steady. So, you know, these studies just started like last July. So all we have is 6 month follow-up. So far, the antibody levels are staying strong after the vaccine. And I'm predicting that, that the immunity will stay. That's what I'm hoping. But to tell you the truth, no one knows the answer to that yet.
Okay. Question number 2, if you've already had COVID and recovered from it, Do you recommend taking the vaccine, and how long until you can get the vaccine after recovering from COVID?
Okay, so I put that in the slides, that that in the consent form, and what experts are recommending if you've had COVID is to wait 90 days after you tested positive to get the vaccine. And yes, you should get the vaccine, and I'll explain why. Actually, the vaccine produces some different antibodies than the antibodies that are created by COVID themselves. So they're slightly different antibodies. And what studies have shown is that people who have COVID and develop antibodies, when you go for your first vaccine, you develop the same level of antibodies as someone who has had their second dose of vaccine. But you see, giving the one dose increases your antibodies even that much more from having COVID itself. So yes, it's recommended to get the COVID-19 vaccine, even if you've had COVID before. And I would recommend it. And I would recommend even getting both doses. And for people who have long COVID or have, prolonged symptoms of COVID, studies have actually been coming out and showing if you get the COVID vaccine, it can actually help to reduce the symptoms of long COVID. So another reason to get the vaccine.
Super. Are any of the vaccines effective against the India variant?
Okay, we don't have a lot of information about the India variant. It's called P1617. We know the mutations, and the mutations are similar to the South African and Brazilian variant. So in my mind, it's probably acting very similar to those variants. And so the problem is actually the AstraZeneca vaccine doesn't work against the South African variant. I have those slides if you want to see them. So that actually might be part of the problem that's contributing in India, because that's the vaccine that they rolled out, was the AstraZeneca and Covishield. So I've been scouring the internet looking for papers on the P1617 variant. There's not a lot of information, just the mutations that are associated with it, and they're the same mutations in the South African and Brazilian variant. So in my mind, it acts very similar to that.
Okay, super. How about side effects if you get COVID, how it can impact your heart?
Like, are you talking about vaccine or COVID itself?
COVID itself. I think.
Okay.
The question says, is there any chance to get effects with myocardium?
Oh, I see. Right.
Assume, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So very interesting question. The vaccine itself cannot affect the heart, but COVID itself can. So they're showing that the immune response, they've had cases showing myocarditis, so in inflammation of the heart related to COVID. So yes, plus what they've seen in the heart is that blood clotting is a very important pathophysiology of COVID itself. So they've also seen microclots happening in the heart. So they've been doing MRIs of the heart showing the myocarditis as well as the clots in the heart. So yes, COVID can affect the heart.
Excellent, thanks. If we've been given one type of vaccine for our first vaccination, can we be given a different type for our second vaccination?
So the only country that's doing that, and we're still waiting for the results, is the UK. And the results haven't been released yet. So the UK has done studies where they gave the AstraZeneca vaccine as the first one, and then the Pfizer vaccine as the second one. And theoretically, there could be the idea that there would be benefits of giving two different types of vaccines, with the AstraZeneca one first and or an adenovirus first and then an mRNA second, but we haven't seen those studies yet, and likely not to happen in Canada, because in Canada we follow Health Canada labeling, which follows what's done in clinical trials.
Super, thank you. Okay, how can I be sure I won't get adverse effects from the vaccine years down the road?
Okay, so this is a common question, which is, if I get the vaccine now, are there long-term side effects? Could I expect side effects, 10 years from now? And the answer is no. Vaccines do not cause side effects long-term. The vaccine is given, the product in the vaccine, whether it's messenger RNA or a protein or the adenovirus, it doesn't stay in the body for that long. It either disintegrates, it gets peed out, it goes away. The substance of the vaccine goes away. Even the S protein that's created doesn't stay around. All that happens is the triggering of the immune system, the B cells, the plasma cells, then create antibodies. But even those antibodies go away after a while. And what we're left with are these memory B cells that have been primed, so that if an infection ever happens, then they can very quickly be converted to plasma cells and create antibodies. But no long-term side effects from these vaccines, or any vaccine.
Okay, great. Someone asked a question about getting vaccinated during pregnancy versus nursing. And if there's any benefits to waiting, I guess, until the baby's born, or, are there any studies that could show better results from getting vaccinated while pregnant versus nursing?
Interesting question. So I would say, what I can tell you, like the latest study I saw, there was a study published 2 weeks in the New England Journal about mRNA vaccines being given in the US to pregnant women, with good response, as well as no increased side effects of the vaccines in pregnant people. I still have to stand by to take the vaccine the soonest, the better. So I think if you can get a spot, if you're pregnant, to get vaccinated, I would get the vaccine. I think what you're thinking about is this theoretical idea that that people who are pregnant have suppressed immune systems, so they don't mount as good an immune response. Maybe that's what you're thinking. So it's better to wait until you've delivered, then your immune response is better, so you'll get a better immune response when you're breastfeeding. Maybe that's what you're thinking about. But the immunosuppression from being pregnant, it's not in the order of immunosuppression like people who are on biologics or who have leukemia. It's not in the same order. So I would say that it would be fine to get vaccinated in pregnancy or breastfeeding, and I would still stand by getting vaccinated as soon as you can.
So just following up to the question about the different vaccines at different times, you mentioned in the States that the mRNA vaccine was followed by DNA. What about if someone got the DNA and then the mRNA vaccine? Like if they did it the other way around?
I don't know. I don't think the studies doing that are being done.
And do you recommend at all making a decision to go and get one vaccine and then going to get the other kind of vaccine in Canada where it's not typically being done?
No, I personally stand by what NACI is saying, that the most important thing right now is to get as many people vaccinated as possible, and for having as many people get the first dose as possible. And then I also agree that we have to follow the Health Canada guidelines, and we have to follow what the large studies did. And so, another very common question I get is, were these vaccines developed too quickly? Was it rushed? And the answer is no. This is a scientific feat where a Chinese researcher released the gene sequence. They were able to develop these vaccines, messenger RNA vaccines, viral vector vaccines, very quickly, but on the back of decades of research on messenger RNA and also adenovirus vaccines. And they enrolled, look at the numbers, 43,000 people in a trial, 30,000 people in trials. So these are the numbers that would be standard for any vaccine trial. And then the vaccine trials then show 95% efficacy, 94% efficacy, 66% efficacy, so forth. So then Health Canada and myself as a clinical trialist, I would stand by that you have to give the vaccines as they were designed in the trials, which are the same version for the first dose and the second dose.
Thanks. You had mentioned in your talk on Saturday about the approval of vaccines in general by Health Canada. So the efficacy of them. Maybe you could speak to that again, because I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, these vaccine trials were not rushed. It was just a feat to enroll so many participants. And partly we can enroll that many participants because so many people are getting infected, right? And that's why we can enroll so many. It's affecting the whole world. And for other vaccines to actually be approved by Health Canada, you only have to meet a 50% efficacy. So even like influenza vaccine only has an efficacy in the order of 50%. And we're talking about vaccines here who have efficacies of 66%, in the labeling trials for AstraZeneca and J&J, but then those two vaccines have efficacies of 85% in real life and in longer follow-up. And then the messenger RNA have efficacies of 95% compared to the bar of 50% of approval by Health Canada.
Great, thanks. Another question is, are you aware of any other countries that are delaying the second dose of the vaccine like Canada?
Great question. Yes. So the country is the place is the UK. So absolutely, the UK did the same strategy. So they took the approach of vaccinating as many people with a first dose. So yes, so we're not the first. The UK was before us. And to tell you the truth, also Quebec. If you remember, Quebec made the policy of rolling out a first dose before Ontario did. And Quebec has boded better during this third wave than we have.
Excellent. Thank you, Mona. Someone is saying, I've heard conflicting arguments about the use of ivermectin as a successful drug against COVID. Do you know anything about this?
One of my favorite drugs. I love ivermectin. For people who don't know, it's an anti-parasitic. And from the studies that I've seen, they're not panning out as ivermectin being effective against COVID. Sorry to let you know.
And someone else, and just confirming, we are taping this tonight for those of you that are asking about whether it is taped. Does anybody else have any typed messages they want to add in for Mona? Oh, here's one. Is there a reason why AstraZeneca and J&J aren't made available at vaccine clinics or pop-ups, given they don't require special refrigeration? Given the negative publicity around AstraZeneca, I feel this gives the impression that AstraZeneca isn't as good as Pfizer or Moderna.
Okay, I'm surprised I haven't been asked, have people heard about the nasty statement that came out today? So NACI, the National Advisory Committee on Immunizations, came out with a statement today saying that the messenger RNA vaccines are preferred over the viral vector vaccines. I don't agree with that. I believe that it's about vaccinating as many people as possible with the first dose as soon as possible. I showed you the study results that the AstraZeneca vaccine shows efficacies of 85% in real life. And so I think why the pop-ups are using the mRNA vaccines, because I've been involved a little bit with some of that at my hospital, which is Women's College Hospital. It has to do with the fact that the pop-ups can store the vaccines at -70 degrees. So they, we have had large deliveries of Pfizer and also some deliveries of Moderna. So that would be, but I actually agree with you. So that, but I think it's a logistical thing. The idea is that at the pop-ups, they have the facilities, and the hospitals have the facilities to store vaccine at -70, -20 and administer them, while the pharmacies have storage that allows the refrigerated temperatures. That's why I think the difference has been made, but I do agree with you. And I also work in Saskatchewan, and I know in Saskatchewan, they're giving the AstraZeneca vaccines at the hospitals.
Great. I think that answers all their questions. They did ask something about a Toronto Star article, but I'm not sure if you know what that article is specifically. If you don't, then Solange, if you could follow up on what you meant by the Toronto Star article, that would be great. In the meantime, do you know what the Toronto Star article is, Mona?
I don't. There's so many that I read every day. I'm a big supporter of the Toronto Star.
Okay, no problem.
We need journalists. You know, they're the ones. There are researchers on the ground telling us what's happening. I see a couple of other questions.
Yeah, about any chance Canada will manufacture a vaccine.
So what I have heard is that it's possible for Canada to be looking into manufacturing the Novavax vaccine. That's the protein vaccine, which the trial has been finished and it's very effective. And so that's the vaccine that I heard that Canada is looking to set up a plant and manufacture. I saw another question about why is the AstraZeneca well, AstraZeneca requires just like refrigeration and not to be in a freezer because it's a DNA vaccine, adenovirus, so it's more stable. But that might not be your exact question.
She posted up the article. So it was, which COVID-19 vaccine should you get? Canada's experts panels say that depends.
Yeah, so, you know, this is I think this goes to show you that medicine is an art form. It's not, there's so much that comes into play. There's the science. So I showed you the science. I showed you the clinical trials. There's the risks. And then every individual person has the way that they handle risk. So some people look at numbers and look at risk differently than other people. So you have to take that into consideration. It's the art of medicine. So for me, I don't agree with them. I think that all the vaccines have been shown to be highly effective. There are serious adverse events, so we have to know that, but we know the rates now. They're very low, and we now know how to identify them, and we know how to treat them. So to me, but that's okay. Experts, you know, don't have to agree. I personally don't think it's helpful for a national committee to be saying that because some pharmacies, like even our clinic, we have hundreds of doses of AstraZeneca vaccine. And can you imagine if they go wasted? That's gonna, like, that's a, you know, I think that's a real, I think that's a real, that'll be a real shame.
Thank you, Mona. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So, oh, there's one, you can see it.
Okay, yes, I usually get this question. I was gonna put it in my common questions, but then I thought it would be too many slides. Oh, yes. So, okay, I'll answer this in with two answers. I'll answer the first one first. Very common question: does getting the vaccine affect fertility? And the SOGC and the CFAS, the Canadian Fertility Andrology Society, have said no. So that no, getting the vaccine does not affect fertility. So that's important to know. And then the other common question that gets asked about young girls is, what about children? When can children get the vaccine? As I said on Saturday, Pfizer has completed their study of giving the Pfizer vaccine day 1 and day 21 to people ages 12 to 16. And they've completed the study and reported it. And if you can imagine, it was 100% effective. And they have already filed to the US FDA, and they filed to Health Canada. And I'm pretty sure you probably saw in the news that the FDA is probably going to approve it maybe even next week for people over the age of 12. And I hope Health Canada does also. And as soon as 12-year-olds and older can get vaccinated. So it's probably going to be first Pfizer, that people 12 and older can get vaccinated. I will get my daughter vaccinated. And the studies in children are rolling out right now. So with Pfizer and Moderna. So we'll hear about those.
Okay, I got a text message for a question for you.
Oh, that's exciting.
Can you ask her thoughts on Bell's palsy from the vaccine, or do you have, or is there any increased occurrence of Bell's palsy with any of the vaccines?
Okay, so Bell's palsy, if everybody knows, Bell's palsy it is when a cranial nerve gets affected and you get like the droopy face, you know, like one of our prime ministers has. That's Bell's palsy. And actually, like many vaccines have been associated with Bell's palsy. Again, like an immune response, and then the antibodies can attack the nerve, and then most Bell's palsy fully resolves or mostly resolves. And yes, I have heard there have been cases of Bell's palsy as a side effect from the COVID-19 vaccines, but again, so rare that it's not even making it into the requirement, the product monograph, and into the media. But yes, there have been cases, but it would be similar to any vaccine.
Okay, great. Now, anybody else have any questions they want to put in the chat or ask Mona yourselves? Text messages?
Okay, so we're hoping to post this recording, and if people want, I'm happy to post the slides, and you can share the slides if
Hey,
that's
Mona.
helpful to people. Yes, hi.
I'm so sorry. I slipped in one little last question on behalf of my aunt, who wanted to know, what if you've previously had Bell's palsy? Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. I think people would say it's fine to get the vaccine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, everybody. So we'll post the recording and we'll post the slides. And thank you so much for joining. And I hope that's been helpful. And share the information with your friends and family. Okay, bye everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mona.
Bye, Mona.
Bye.
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you.
Bye.